How can a company offer free 2-day shipping, sell products at razor-thin margins, and still be worth over $2 trillion? You open Amazon. You buy a book for $15 with free shipping. Amazon pays $12 for that book, $3 to ship it, and makes exactly $0 on the transaction. Sometimes they lose money. So how is Amazon one of the most profitable companies on earth? Here's what doesn't add up. Amazon's retail operation, everything you actually buy from them, operates on margins so thin they're almost invisible. North American retail makes about 4.5% operating margin on a good quarter. That's barely profitable. Meanwhile, Amazon's total operating income is massive, over $60 billion annually. So where's the money actually coming from? The answer isn't in the boxes showing up at your door. It's in something most people have never heard of, something that generates 65–70% of Amazon's entire profit despite being only 18% of revenue. It's called Amazon Web Services, or Oz, and it's not selling products. It's selling the invisible infrastructure that runs the internet. This is the story of how Amazon used retail as bait to build a cloud computing empire, and why understanding this reveals the real economics of modern monopolies. Let's start with the numbers that don't make sense until you see the full picture. In Q3 2025, Amazon generated $158.9 billion in total revenue. The breakdown reveals everything. Oz brought in $27.5 billion, just 17.3% of total revenue. But here's the critical number. Oz generated $10.4 billion in operating income on that $27.5 billion. That's a 37.8% operating margin. Meanwhile, Amazon's North American retail segment generated $95.5 billion in revenue, but only $4.3 billion in operating income, a 4.5% margin. International retail actually lost money in some quarters. Do the math. Oz is 17% of revenue, but generates roughly 65–70% of Amazon's total operating profit. Without Oz, Amazon would be a low-margin retail company barely breaking even. With Oz, Amazon is a cloud computing giant that happens to also sell you books and toilet paper. What is Oz? Most people have no idea, but they use it every day. Oz is cloud computing infrastructure, servers, storage, databases, networking, software that companies rent instead of building themselves. Netflix streams on Oz. The CIA runs intelligence systems on Oz. Adobe, Airbnb, Slack, Spotify, Twitch, and tens of thousands of other companies run their businesses on AWS infrastructure. When you watch Netflix, you're using Amazon. When the government processes classified data, they're using Amazon. Oz has 31% of the global cloud market as of 2025, more than Microsoft Azure at 25% and Google Cloud at 11% combined. This isn't a side business. It's the dominant infrastructure platform of the internet economy. Over 100,000 companies globally depend on Oz to operate, from two-person startups to Fortune 500 corporations. Samsung runs mobile services on Oz. Nasdaq runs financial systems on Oz. Even companies you'd think would be competitors use Oz because the alternative, building equivalent infrastructure themselves, would cost billions and take years. Here's how Amazon built this empire, and the origin story matters because it shows how accidental monopolies become intentional extraction systems. Back in the early 2000s, Amazon was struggling with their own infrastructure. During holiday shopping peaks, their systems would crash. They had to massively overbuild capacity to handle Black Friday, which meant 90% of that capacity sat idle the rest of the year. So Amazon's engineers, led by Andy Jassy, who would later become CEO of all of Amazon, developed sophisticated internal systems to handle retail operations, inventory management, transaction processing, massive scalability for peak shopping days. In 2003, Amazon leadership realized other companies faced the same problems but couldn't afford to solve them. What if Amazon rented out their infrastructure when they weren't using it? In 2006, AWS launched with 3 services: Simple Storage Service for storing files, Elastic Compute Cloud for renting computing power, and Simple Queue Service for managing data flow. The pricing was revolutionary: pay by the hour, no contracts, no minimum spend. A college student could rent Amazon's infrastructure for $10 and shut it off when done. This was unthinkable at the time. Traditional IT meant buying servers, hiring staff, managing data centers, hundreds of thousands in upfront costs. Oz made computing power as easy to access as electricity from a wall socket. And just like electricity companies, once Oz got customers plugged in, they never left. The business model is extraction through infrastructure control, and the margins prove it. Once Amazon builds a data center, which costs hundreds of millions, the marginal cost of renting out additional computing power is relatively low. Electricity, cooling, maintenance, bandwidth, these are real costs, but they scale efficiently. Meanwhile, AWS charges based on value to customers, not cost to Amazon. A startup launching a new app might pay $500 per month. That same startup, if it becomes successful, might scale to $50,000 per month, then $500,000, then $5 million. Oz revenue grows automatically as customers grow, but AWS costs grow much more slowly. This is why margins are 38%. The infrastructure cost is fixed while revenue scales infinitely. And here's the beautiful part for Amazon: customers can't leave easily. Once you build your entire business on AWS, switching means rewriting code, retraining engineers, migrating petabytes of data, risking downtime that could cost millions per hour. The switching costs are enormous, so Oz revenue becomes incredibly sticky. Companies might hate paying Amazon, but they keep paying because leaving is worse. The lock-in gets even more sophisticated. Oz now offers 200-plus services beyond basic computing and storage. Machine learning through SageMaker. Database management through RDS and DynamoDB. Content delivery through CloudFront. Blockchain, quantum computing, Internet of Things, robotics. Every time you adopt another AWS service, you get more entangled in their ecosystem. Netflix uses so many Oz services that moving to another cloud provider would require rebuilding significant portions of their technology stack. That's not a customer relationship, that's dependency. And Amazon has $200 billion in committed future Oz revenue already locked in through multi-year contracts. These are enterprise agreements where companies commit to spending minimum amounts over 3-5 years in exchange for volume discounts. Amazon knows they'll earn $200 billion regardless of what happens in the economy, regardless of competition, regardless of anything. That's not revenue, that's tribute. Now here's where the empire pattern becomes undeniable. Amazon uses retail dominance to subsidize cloud dominance, then uses cloud profits to subsidize retail losses, creating an unbeatable competitive position in both markets. Traditional retailers like Walmart, Target, or Best Buy can't compete on price because they don't have a $40 billion per year cloud computing cash machine funding their operations. Amazon can sell you a Kindle at a loss because AWS profits cover it. They can offer free shipping because cloud margins pay for it. They can undercut every competitor systematically because they're not actually trying to make money on retail. Retail is the customer acquisition channel for Prime subscriptions, the data generation engine for their recommendation algorithms, and the market dominance tool that gives them leverage over suppliers. Meanwhile, AWS is the profit engine running underneath everything. Look at the capital expenditure numbers and you'll see where Amazon is really investing. In 2025, Amazon announced $125 billion in capital expenditures. Where's that money going? Not warehouses, data centers, AI computing chips, networking equipment. The vast majority is Oz infrastructure. Amazon is spending more on cloud infrastructure in 1 year than most countries spend on their entire military. They're building data centers faster than Microsoft and Google combined. Why? Because cloud computing has winner-take-most dynamics. If you're the biggest, you get the best economies of scale, which lets you charge less, which attracts more customers, which gives you more scale. It's a virtuous cycle if you're winning and a death spiral if you're losing. Amazon is winning, and they're using Oz profits to widen the gap every quarter. The real-world impact hits every business on the internet, and most don't even realize they're being extracted from. If you're a company trying to compete with Amazon in retail, you're fighting an opponent that can lose money indefinitely on e-commerce while making billions in cloud. If you're trying to compete with Oz in cloud computing, you're fighting an opponent with a decade head start, 31% market share, $200 billion in locked-in future revenue, and margins so high they can undercut your pricing and still profit. The game is rigged before you start. If you're a startup, you probably build on AWS because it's easy and cheap initially. But as you scale, you're handing Amazon a percentage of your revenue forever. If you succeed, Amazon wins. If you fail, Amazon still got paid. And if you build a business that threatens Amazon's retail operations, well, you're running on their infrastructure and they can see your data. The conflict of interest is obvious, but there's no alternative with equivalent scale. This is extraction through infrastructure monopoly, and it's the oldest empire pattern in history. Roman emperors didn't just collect taxes, they controlled roads, aqueducts, ports, the physical infrastructure that made commerce possible. Anyone wanting to trade paid Rome for access. British imperialists didn't just sell goods, they controlled shipping routes, telegraph lines, undersea cables, the communication infrastructure of global commerce. Anyone wanting to do international business paid Britain for access. Amazon doesn't just sell products, they control cloud infrastructure, logistics networks, payment systems, and now healthcare data through their acquisitions. Anyone wanting to do internet business pays Amazon for access. The extraction happens at the infrastructure layer because that's where you have pricing power. Retail is competitive, margins are thin. Infrastructure is monopolistic, margins are fat. And here's the part that should terrify anyone thinking about the future. Oz is moving into artificial intelligence and machine learning services that will make the lock-in even stronger. Companies are now training AI models on AWS infrastructure, which means their most valuable intellectual property, their algorithms, their training data, their AI capabilities, all sit on Amazon's servers. As AI becomes central to every business, AWS becomes even more central to the economy. Amazon is positioning to be the infrastructure provider for the AI revolution the same way they became the infrastructure provider for the internet revolution. And just like with cloud computing, whoever builds the infrastructure extracts rent from everyone else who uses it. The margins tell the whole story, 38% for Oz versus 4.5% for retail. Amazon makes 8 times more profit per dollar of Oz revenue than per dollar of retail revenue. They're not a retail company, they're an infrastructure company that uses retail as competitive camouflage. Every time you buy something on Amazon and wonder how they can be so cheap, remember, they don't need to profit from you buying stuff. They profit from Netflix paying millions per month, from the CIA paying billions for cloud contracts, from 100,000 companies worldwide paying rent to use Amazon's infrastructure. You're not the customer generating profit, you're the user generating data and market share. The real customers are the businesses locked into Oz, paying 38% margins on infrastructure they can't live without. This is the empire economy, where we decode the extraction systems operating in plain sight. Amazon's real business isn't selling you products, it's selling computing infrastructure to every business on Earth, charging monopoly rents because switching is impossible, and using those massive profits to dominate everything else. That cheap book you bought, that's just the bait. The real money is in the cloud you never see.